In this video, I'll be showing you how to make some high-waisted stretch shorts using a pattern from sewwithme.com. So if you guys are interested in that, keep on watching the video. If you guys are interested in making these shorts or sewing along, I do have this pattern available on sewwithme.com. This pattern comes in sizes 0 through 26, and they also come with written and picture instructions to make putting it together a little bit easier. So I have all my pages printed out. The pages are marked in alphabetical and numerical order to help for easy assembly when you are putting the pages together. They also have a ruler at the top of the left-hand corner to make sure that you printed out the pages to scale, so that way your pattern size will be the correct size. I also have information in the instructions that shows you how to print these patterns to scale, so that way everything will fit how it's supposed to. And then you just go ahead and tape your pieces together so that way you can see your full pattern. And this is what the pattern should look like once you have all your pieces taped together. And now you can go ahead and cut it out. So the next step is to cut our pattern pieces out of the fabric. The pattern pieces do not have seam allowance already added into them. I do not add it when I draft the patterns. So when you cut these out, you will have to add seam allowance according to what the instructions call for. These call for a half-inch seam allowance, so I went ahead and cut it like that. So that way when I do assemble these on the sewing machine, everything can fit correctly and not be too tight. All right, so now that we have all of our pattern pieces cut out of the fabric, we want to go ahead and now snip our notches. There's little lines on the pattern that are considered notches, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to snip them, so that way when you align your fabric later on, you can line up your snips that you made to make sure that the fabric is where it's supposed to be before you sew it together. All right, so let's start putting the shorts together. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get your two center back pieces, and you want to make sure they're together, right sides facing. Right side facing is basically um, the part of the fabric that you want on the outside of your finished garment. That's considered the right side. So you want to make sure that they're facing each other when you're pinning the pins together. So you want to pin all the way from the top all the way down around the curve to the end, and you also want to do the same thing on the center front piece. Okay, so now we're moving on to the waistband. With the waistband, you want to make sure that your two front waistband pieces are facing each other right side facing, and your two back waistband pieces are facing each other right sides facing. And you're just going to go ahead and pin across the top of each one of those bands, because we're going to have to sew across it later. All right, so for our last step of prep before we hit the sewing machine, so what I'm doing here is marking my hem. So for this one, I'm just marking 1 inch away from the raw edge at the bottom, because later on I'm gonna go ahead and roll that up 1/2 inch and sew it in place. But before we even go to the sewing machine, I just rather mark everything now, so that way later on I could just constantly flow. Okay, so now we can finally take it to the machine. I am using a zigzag stitch, of course, because it is stretch fabric. The pattern calls for a length to be between 2 to 2.5 and the width to be between 1 and 2.5. Um, as it really doesn't matter, as long as you're in that area, you should be okay. I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, of course, because that's what the pattern calls for. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew down the center front and the center back of the shorts. Now we could start working on the waistbands. So for the waistbands, all we're going to do is sew a 1/2 inch from the raw edge across the top of both of our waistbands, so the front and the back. Now that you have your waistbands sewn across the top, you're going to go ahead and open them up and lay them on top of each other, right side facing, and go ahead and pin them at the side seam. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you're matching up your seam from your front band and your back band, so that way they look nice when you turn them out right. So what I do is I line up the first edge, and then I go in the middle, make sure that the seams are lined up, and then I go to the other edge and pin there. And then you wanna go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. Now you want to go ahead and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance down each of the side seams of the waistbands. Okay, now back to the actual body of the shorts. So on the hem where we marked our line, we're going to go ahead and roll that raw edge to that line and pin it in place. Pin it, clip it, whatever you do. Now we're just stitching it down in place with a zigzag stitch. All I did was match up the rolled hem that we created with the edge of the foot that I'm using and just sew down the middle of it. And you want to do this for each leg of your shorts. Okay, so now that we have a full front piece and a full back piece to our shorts, we can go ahead and put them together. So to put them together, I went ahead and I pinned up one of the side seams through the crotch, making sure that I lined up the seams as nice as I could. And then I went ahead and pinned up the other side seam. Now I'm just stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the side seam through the crotch and up the other side seam. Now we want to pin our waistband to our shorts. So to do this, you want to make sure that your shorts are turned right side out and your waistband is also turned right side out. And this is where those notches come into play. So what you want to do is you want to match up the notches on the waistband with the notches that you have notched on the actual body of the shorts. And you want to match them up as best as you can and pin their stuff in place. So that way, when we go ahead and sew around it, everything will be in the correct spot. And it should look something like this. Okay, so at this point, the shorts are pretty much put together. Only thing we need to do now is attach the waistband by sewing it down a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge with a zigzag stitch from one end of the waist all the way around to the next. And then when you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're lining up your seam so that way it looks nice when you fold it. And that's it, a quick and easy sewing tutorial for the high-waisted stretch shorts. In my opinion, this is very beginner friendly. Remember, it is available on sewwithmecs.com, and thank you for watching.